This is the Marketing Umbrella Podcast, where it's all about getting the information you need from successful leading marketers to build and grow your digital marketing agency. Brought to you by Itamar Shafir, founder and CEO of Umbrella, the technology platform and brand that is powering thousands of marketing agencies around the country. Find him at umbrellaus.com. Now, here's your host, Kevin Pruitt.
This is Kevin Pruitt with another episode of the Marketing Umbrella Podcast. I want to welcome everyone to this show created by Itamar Shafir of Umbrella. And really just what we want to do is we want to interview marketing experts that will really provide value for those that are wanting to scale their marketing agencies. Our guest today is a previous mental health therapist turned show host and digital business owner. After her hobby podcast, NFTs for Newbies, hit 1 million downloads in 8 months. She fell in love with Web3 and is now actively studying how online communities are not only building successful projects, but also humanizing the internet. She also led a strong community movement called Unconventional Leaders that has broad impact across a variety of sectors. It's my pleasure to welcome Heather Parady to the podcast today. Hi, Heather.
I am thrilled to be here. Kevin, congrats on you with all the amazing content you put out in the world and the consistency and the value that you add. I'm just super excited to get to talk to you today.
Well, it is certainly my pleasure to once again just touch base with you. But man, I am there's just so much there. What did I leave out? I mean, you're a pretty complex little critter.
That's, my husband would agree. He would agree with you there. I don't think you left anything out. I think the most surprising thing to me about what you just read is that I am heavily involved now in the tech space, which I would have never dreamed a year ago. I couldn't have told you what the blockchain was. I couldn't have told you anything about cryptocurrency or NFTs or anything like that. And literally 1 year ago in July, we're recording this in June, I bought my very first NFT and it changed my life, and not from a monetary, position, although it was really interesting learning how all that works, but just immersing myself in the next wave iteration of the internet that they call Web3, which many people say is coming, but Kevin, it's already here. Yep. And it's going to change everything from the way that we consume to the way that our businesses are ran and the way that we market. So that's what kind of hooked me in. And here a year later, I'm a student.
So looking at your background, you were like the queen of pivot. When I'm looking at the different ways that you've kind of taken this serpentine path to get here, but nothing's wasted. Nothing's wasted in your former economy here. So walk us through kind of the journey, just from a macro standpoint. Just say, okay, postgraduate, this is where I landed. This is what I was doing. Kind of led to this. Kind of led to this. Just I want our listeners to really understand who Heather Parady is.
Sure. And I'll keep this brief, but hopefully it'll be valuable to think about what you said, the power of the pivot and the willingness to take clues from God, universe, whatever, life, to kind of lean into what you're curious. So during graduate school, I started a side business. And it was photography. It was service-based, but I started learning that the social media, this digital world was really interesting, because although I was an okay photographer, I was booking shows, booking gigs left and right. And it wasn't necessarily because of my talent, but it was because I was really good at figuring out how to connect with people on Facebook and Instagram and so forth. And so by the time I graduated, with mental health counseling, I was sitting there with my license and 3 job offers on the table and just in tears, literally, because I knew that I had fallen in love with this digital world. But I had spent a long time studying therapy. And so my husband's the best. And he said, hey, most people don't cry when they have job offers and have opportunity in front of them. Pay attention to what your body is telling you. Pay attention to what your instincts are telling you. And so I turned everything down and went ahead and just started building what I could online. And so practically what that looks like is looking at the skill sets in your hand and saying, what value can I add right now? And it may not be what you want to do long term, right? So I started freelancing. I started editing people's podcasts. I started making Instagram posts. I started my time was the asset that I could give. And so slowly doing that, for a couple of years, I started acquiring other skill sets and broadening. And it looks like a lot of pivots, but really I see it as kind of like a growth and a natural progression from, one end of the spectrum and slowly kind of niching down and niching down and niching down and getting a little bit more specific and understanding a little bit more who you are. My favorite quote in the world is action creates clarity. And so taking small action, day in and day out helps you become a little bit more clear about who you are. And so you mentioned unconventional leaders. I spent a few years studying unconventional leadership, started my own show, got to interview some incredible people, led a community. And then Web3 kind of fell into my world. And so I, curious, pivoted a little bit into that, a lot of it. And here we are. So, I mean, it seems like a very long time. It seems up and down and crazy, but the reality is it's probably been about 5 years. And I'll tell you what, I don't want to say the courage, I want to say the craziness, the gumption, the audacity to lean into something that excites you and seems far-fetched has been such a gift. And I don't want to make it seem like it's been easy. It's been really hard, but I'm so grateful that I leaned in, and my husband was so generous to let me explore a little bit, because here we are.
Well, you mentioned it. You touched on it just briefly about the whole idea of kind of community, and I've used the word pivot earlier, but I as you were talking, I'm thinking more like maybe it's more of a maturation. Maybe you're maturing into whatever that is, because it really, when you think of a pivot, it's almost like doing something almost the exact opposite of what you were doing before, or it's just a dramatic change. And actually, it may not be. It may just be a clarification. As you're kind of moving, but you've built some, and in different areas, you built some incredible communities. So walk us through the kind of the idea. I mean, you even mentioned it just in passing, back. I really learned how to connect with people on Facebook. I learned to connect with people on social media, Instagram, wherever it was. What were the triggers, I guess, or the things that you found that really worked? Because a lot of people talk about building community, but very few of them do it successfully.
Yeah, totally. And that's what's Web3. Okay. And I don't want to go too much into Web3 just yet, but you'll hear that it's all about building community, which is really interesting to me, because I think that sounds really kind and nice and like, oh, that's so sweet, we all about community. But very few people really understand the difference between like audience building versus community building. For sure. And when we think of social media, we've primarily been into an audience building mode, and for good reason. It's made sense, right? With algorithms and stuff, the bigger the audience you have, the more you get people to engage, the more your content is going to be able to be put in front of them, and hopefully that'll lead to sales or whatever action that you want them to take. Also, to just social credibility, and we have those blue check marks and the rise of the influencer and so forth. Being able to gather people around a person or a subject matter has been huge for businesses. What's interesting is, again, the line between audience building and community building, and why I didn't know that I was leaning into community building a few years ago. It was something that just kind of came naturally for me. I enjoyed it a little bit more, was this idea of involvement, right? So our people are not just passive consumers of our content, but they're actually actively involved in it. They feel ownership of it. They feel like their voices are heard. We as the leaders are giving them a voice. We're implementing, their feedback, their opinions into the work that we do. And there's variations of this. So I think we saw a little bit of the power of that, with Facebook groups and some of these other platforms that in the quote Web2 space that we've been doing for a few years. But with Web3 specifically, and kind of what we're shifting into with tech, is this demand for community, because people want to feel part of ownership of what you're creating. And we can kind of get into, what that means tactically, but just emotionally being willing to do that as a creator, it takes a lot of intention, because, we kind of get into these creation cycles where I'm going to make a podcast, I'm going to put out a blog, I'm going to make a social post. Sure. But that is different than curating engagement and figuring out how to facilitate a conversation. It plays a part in it, but it's not the whole thing. And so I'm excited about this new wave because it's forcing us creators to get a little creative.
Well, you can't define a word using its own words. So, I mean, you have to be a little more creative than that. But,
I sure did.
So going back though, I mean, I love the clarification, it said, audience building is not necessarily community building. Matter of fact, it's probably not community building. And, the theme that I think of when I think of communities is nurturing. It's like, it's not just gathering. It's actually nurturing. It's the next
Good.
step beyond that. And how do you engage, in a way that doesn't feel salesy? How do you
Hmm.
engage that doesn't feel like, hey, you're only here for my benefit? There has to be a mutual benefit to this. So if you're
Hmm.
speaking to agency owners that
Hmm.
they certainly see the value in
Hmm.
community building. They certainly see the need to lead their clients even in how do they build communities. What are one or two things that you really would say these are crucial that you have to lead your folks to do so they can build really strong, vibrant communities around products, services, movement, so to speak? What are one or
Hmm.
two really crucial things that you think are important?
So having a really clear ethos of what you stand for and kind of the heartbeat. It's one thing to say that I'm going to gather a community about the power of coffee. And trust me, I love coffee. So if you want to have a community about that, your girl will join. But that is a physical thing. That's not something we necessarily stand for. Why is coffee important? Maybe we have this thing about starting your day awake or energized, or the way you start your day, or, you know, relationships are better over a cup of coffee. There's some kind of story or emotional reason that we're behind that community, and the reason that we show up and the reason that we're there. It has to be a little bit deeper than sometimes the the thing that initially gathered
Right,
us, right?
right.
So I think that's really important. Raising up leaders is super important, because if you don't actively figure out how to get advocates for your community who bring in new members, who help
Mhm.
nurture new members, you're going to have a growth problem, and you can't do everything that yourself. And so raising up leaders, it's one key element to that, which kind of goes into point number three. Is a sequence of growth within your community. A lot of the people call this gamification, which a simple way of thinking about that is, when I go to a coffee shop, I keep using a coffee shop example. You see what I'm my addiction here. But I get a little stamp every time that I go, and the 10th
Yep.
stamp, I get a free cup of coffee. That's a super example of gamification, but essentially it's rewarding behavior. It's rewarding me going there. And if you think about in a community, if they're not getting rewarded for certain behaviors, if they're not seeing a natural progression of their own growth, through rankings or levels or whatever that eventually leads to this leadership role, it's really hard to find purpose within that community. And so there's no clear cut answer with that, because every brand is so different. But my question would be to these agencies: how does your community know that they are advancing? How are they getting rewarded for the behaviors that you want them to take? And how are those people who are naturally progressive giving leadership roles where they actually feel like that they have some ownership in what you're building, and they're not just passive participants?
That I mean, I love especially that third point about the kind of sequential engagement, that
Yes.
you kind of just clarified there. But so I'm having a little trouble though understanding the difference between building building customer base and
Mm.
engaging a customer base versus engaging a community. Because is there ever benefit to engaging your community where it's not necessarily leading to increased sales? Does that make any sense at all?
A
Like
hundred percent.
I
So
see kind of sales versus the
yeah,
strengthening the bond type thing, retention or whatever it is.
and that's where I think, again, a lot of the tension with community building comes into play, because as business owners, we have to make money, and community building is such a slow burn because there
Right.
isn't like this really tight ROI that you can
Right.
measure.
And it wasn't
um,
either or. It's not an
a
either
hundred
or for
percent,
sure.
a
It's
hundred percent.
both
But
and yeah.
I think the difference that we're looking for there, from like customer retention versus community retention, is your community building relationships with each other?
Mm,
Are they finding a sense of identity and belonging with each other without you having to always be there? And now, how is that important? Why is that important? Because that's strengthening your brand. It's building kind of that tribal sense where again, back to the coffee cup people early in the morning who have to start their day right, when you can kind of have that marching order, that beat where they're building relationships with each other, they're texting each other back in, hey, did you have your coffee this morning? Blah, 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 blah. When they're building their own inside jokes and stuff like that, they're building your brand for you. Essentially, they're making it stronger. And so I think that's what's different, is asking yourself, how am I facilitating relationships within my community without me having to be there?
And are you trying to get to the point that you could virtually step out of it and it would be self-sustaining?
Yes.
So, I mean, I can see the whole idea that, especially if we got to the point that there's inside jokes, that they're kind of eating themselves, through relationally, that type of thing. But yeah, I love the way that you kind of frame the idea of community building. I think it's so important because, like I said, there's so many people that talk about it and so few that actually do it well. And some of it, I think there's kind of like this accidental, happening. They, communities just form around products, and the company did zero to create that. It just happened kind of serendipitous. But that is so rare, that happens. And there has to be an intentionality. And I'm really anxious I've kind of held off on this because I really wanted to make sure that we had a clear, foundation that we had laid earlier in this. But the whole idea of, Web 3.0, the whole idea of how NFTs, why did that catch your eye? What was that squirrel, that you just saw out there and you thought, I've got to chase that. So what was
literally it was. So this is what happened. I've been a huge fan of Gary Vaynerchuk for a long time, and whether you like him or not, I will say that he's king community builder. He's fantastic at it, and it took years and years and years and years and years. And I'm evidence of that, because check this out: I'm outside running, and I'm listening to him on the podcast, and he says there's this thing called NFTs, non-fungible tokens. I had no clue what he was talking about. This was 1 year ago in July, but he said, "Trust me, you want in on this? I'm dropping an NFT project. There's these little cartoons, and they're like $1,500 at the time." Okay. Now, I do not advocate for going out and just buying something for $1,500 just because somebody told you to. But I'll tell you, I have spent probably 10 years listening to him and gaining trust with him, which is so huge in community building, that I knew that if I spent $1,500 on this, that I wouldn't regret it. I fully believed that, which goes to the power of personal branding and et cetera, et cetera. But I went home, and I'm like, me and Brian, I mean, that was painful. Like, we were like, okay, we bought two, we got in our savings account and put two out for these little cartoon drawings. And we were embarrassed. We didn't want to tell our friends or our family that we just spent $3,000 on these little cartoon JPEGs. We're like, oh my God. However, I went to a conference a few weeks later, and I just kept hearing like NFTs. People were kind of whispering about it, didn't know. So a friend of mine, we said, well, why don't we start a podcast just for accountability's sake? Because he had just bought an NFT too, and neither he or I knew what the hell we had just bought. So we said, let's, take Gary's advice, document the process of us learning what an NFT was. So we literally opened Google, and it was Googling what we just bought. What is the blockchain? What is Ethereum? I mispronounced Ethereum on the show. We had tens of thousands of people who heard that single episode, and I still get emailed about it. I said Ethereum. Super, super newbie. But what ends up happening is the show just took off, because we realized that there was such a market for newbie information. And a lot of people were like, oh, that's so, brave of you to call yourself a newbie, blah, blah, blah. Isn't that kind of putting yourself down? And I'm like, maybe in a world where we think influencers was the goal, but if our goal is real service, like, we're going to be willing to newbie ourselves, or come out of the newbie closet, you know what I'm saying, and be honest about what we know and we don't know. And I'll tell you what, Kevin, I'll never go back of the sense of seeing the power of I don't know in front of a bunch of people and finding the answer together. So the show took off. But the coolest thing, besides the show taking off, that was awesome, was what a gift it was to learn about this world. And not because I'm techie, and not because I naturally geek out over this, but to figure out the power of creatives and what we can create in this new Web3 world is unreal. And I'm so excited about it. I have a huge conviction for it. And I'm saying all this to say that even if this seems overwhelming, or you're not a techie person, please know that I'm not either. But it's completely rocked my world, and it's about to rock all our world. So lean in a little bit and pay attention.
So Okay, non-fungible token.
Sure.
So you have kind of the digital copyright of a created piece, image, music, could be anything that is built on this blockchain. So that sounded really good in the last, 6 months ago when they were just like screaming off the shelves. Now we're headed into kind of the pre-recession a little bit. So what is you think that's what's going to happen to NFTs in the next 6 to 12 months?
We're finding, and this is just, again, my speculation of being in the space for about a year, but I honestly felt this way when things were popping. And you can find evidence of that listening to NFTs for Newbies. We were talking about this, early on, is the business implications of NFTs. And so for those to kind of catch everybody up, what happened was PSP projects, which are these kind of, these little cartoon drawings that everybody makes fun of, like, oh, I can't believe a cartoon giraffe is worth this much money. A lot of these NFT projects, essentially face value, some of them were so well branded early, whatever, that they were able to create a buzz around them to where they in and of themselves became valuable. So having this cartoon monkey, Bored Ape, whatever, having this crypto punk, all of this stuff was valuable for a variety of reasons. But a lot of it was just this really strong branding and being early. Now, there was some utility, and people say utility, just functionality of that NFT. But what we're seeing right now is with so many projects coming in, so many people trying to replicate what's been done, there's been an oversaturation in the market where, it's a lot harder to build that kind of value, build that kind of community. And so a lot of people are like, oh, well, see, NFTs are dying. I'm like, no. All this has been, in my opinion, like a big smoke screen to the underlying tech, which is going to change so much from our day-to-day lives and the way our business models and so forth. And what I mean by that is essentially an NFT, and this is a very loose, messy way of looking at it, but essentially it's a membership, right? It's a membership to a club, to a community, to, it's access, essentially. So people are building these projects and trying to gather community there and build their own utility from within. But if you think about NFTs within like already an established business, right? So you, Kevin, like you've already been, putting out media for years. If you take that tech and are able to apply it to what you're already doing and be able to use it to incentivize and add more value to your pre-existing community, I think that's where it gets interesting. So it's not Web 2 versus Web 3. It's how can we start integrating some of the Web 3 concepts into what we've already built in Web 2 to add more value and make our businesses stronger.
So how do you see, specifically to marketing agencies or just digital marketing as a whole, what's the NFT overlap? What's the use case? Specifically, if you're speaking to agency owners, like you're saying, okay, this, when you think of NFT, you're thinking of babes, you're thinking of this monkey, this image out there, but what is a broader use case in the digital marketing space?
Yep. So if you think about we're all familiar with courses and memberships and so forth, like in the online world. Let's say you had a marketing membership where people pay $50 a month and they get your content. Maybe they get a Zoom meeting with you once a month, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What's interesting is if you tokenize that, if you put that behind an NFT. So instead of charging people $50 a month, maybe you say, if you buy this NFT for $1,000, you have lifetime access to this academy or whatever. And you're like, well, that's cool, but I won't make any more money after that. Well, if you keep adding value to that membership and making it so exclusive, and the more that you're building your brand, other people will say, well, I want in on that membership. I want to be involved in that. What's interesting is even if you only had 1,000 of those NFTs and you sold out of them, that doesn't mean that one's not for sale, because one of your members may move, may switch industries, may whatever, and put up their NFT for sale. So what's interesting is this is called the creator economy. So instead of me charging people and then them cutting off their membership and leaving, they have an asset that if they don't want to engage with that anymore, they can actually sell their membership to somebody else. So they win. So Kevin, if you bought an NFT of mine for $1,000, I added so much value in that marketing membership that other people were saying, hey, Kevin, how can I buy your NFT so I can get into Heather's marketing membership? And by the time, it's become more and more valuable, you could sell it for $1,500 instead of $1,000. So you were participating in my membership, you got value. And if I'm doing my job right and you're doing your job right as the community building, we're building up the value of that NFT. You make money off of it. And guess what? When you sell it to Paul, there's secondary sales for me too. So that's why they're calling it a creator's market, because what the difference is, a practical application, is if you do it right, if you're focused on community, then the creator is not the only one getting compensated. Potentially the community is getting compensated too, because they have an asset. They have a stake in that membership that they can sell when they're done. And that's one example, but it's powerful when you think about it.
It's kind of the whole idea of all boats rising in a rising tide. I mean, it really is this kind of undergirding, the community itself. And so is it every time this NFT is sold on, is there a residual that stays with? Do you earn a residual? I know that's not the correct terminology, but do you earn kind of that residual ownership? Like every time it's sold, there's a knock-on effect to every previous owner, or just the original creator?
It depends how everything's set up on the back end. So as a creator, I have power to essentially almost make anything. That's what's so interesting about these things that they call smart contracts, which is the underlying tech behind NFTs, and what everybody misses, because they're like, oh, it's just JPEG that you can screenshot. No, it has a contract literally within it that says if this, then that. Usually it's just the creator who gets those secondary sales, but I'm sure there's exceptions where they can set it up where anybody could, but I don't see why a creator would do that unless they were super brave.
I mean, it's such an interesting thing. And I mean, it has a much more broad use case than just, hey, we created this digital asset and we want to sell it on type thing. So I know we're literally just scratching the surface. And I love the way you kind of mentioned it, said, this is almost a smoke screen, that we're in the intro smoke screen. People are thinking, oh, I've got my head around NFTs. Actually, you don't, because, we haven't even invented 98% of the application probably of what this could potentially be, moving forward.
Yeah. I want to tell you one more use case that's interesting. So Gary Vaynerchuk, he had this conference called VCon, and the only way you could get into the conference was to own one of his version 1 NFTs. So what he did is, if I held this NFT, he airdropped a ticket, a digital ticket, essentially into my wallet so I could get access to his conference. This is what's interesting. Those airdrops of those tickets, that was worth money, because other people who didn't have those V1s wanted to go. And let's say that I couldn't go for some reason, I could have sold that. So that was a lot of value to me, because people sold those for $1,500 a pop. At the conference, he said he did a collab with like Snoop Dogg or something. And he was like, hey, something's coming this summer with Snoop Dogg. If you have this virtual ticket, we're going to be airdropping you something. So guess what? I just went to the conference. I got the value of it. I still have that digital ticket, and the value of that digital ticket still is up because there's some other airdrop to it. So you're think about this, like the value of me holding his NFT because he's good at marketing, because he's figured out how to reach his audience and incentivize his audience. I actively engage with his stuff because he's constantly adding value, and he gets those secondary sales from everything. It's mind blowing. But if you think about it, it's literally changing. It's going to change everything.
What is one way that we want to really speak to agency owners here? What is one way that they could, in a simplistic way, what's one way that they could help their clients engage in the NFT space? What's an early low hanging fruit, early entry point?
I love POAPs, and I think that they are like the underdog of this whole space. POAP stands for Proof of Attendance Protocol, and essentially it's a digital ticket stub that is free for you to give to your community, and free for them to engage with. So I'll provide you, Kevin, a link to POAP's website where people can go and walk through the process. But essentially, where we used to just save our concert tickets or save our movie stubs. This is a digital way of doing that. Now you might be thinking, okay, cool. Why would I want a digital ticket that I was at this event? Here's a really cool example. There was this photographer in our Discord. He's a wedding photographer. He decided that everybody at the wedding was going to he asked the bride and groom, I want to provide a POAP, a digital, I was there, photograph to everybody in attendance. And all they have to do is click this link and claim their POAP that I was at Mark and Betty's wedding. And it was this big group photo or this beautiful end of the night photo. And everybody gets it just as a keepsake. Why is that cool for the photographer? He also included in that POAP, if anybody has a POAP, if they were at Mark and Betty's wedding, I'll give you 25% off any family shoot in the fall. So they get a keepsake, but he just advertised to all 150 people there about his service using this thing called a POAP. Another way you could use it is just incentivizing people to participate. Engagement is one of the hardest things in the world, to get people to show up to freaking Zoom calls, participate in your little happy hours, all this stuff. If you gave a POAP every time you were there, again, this is free, that Kevin was here, he was here 10 times, you could set rewards and systems up where people can maybe get a percentage off your services, right, or maybe they get a coffee mug or whatever. It's a free way to add incentives to people, and it's an easy way to get your customers used to digital assets. And
it's iterative engagement. You know, I mean, yes, it's kind of it's cycling. It's the yes, whole, what you talked about earlier. You know, just it really is the kind of the sequential engagement, you know, model that you described earlier. So, yeah. And it's amazing. Is there, wrap us up with one other thing that we don't know that you think is really important in the kind of Web3 NFT space that agency owners would really want to consider as they're working with their clients?
I think advocating for yourself and your clients to just have a digital wallet set up for your business is really, really important. An example of that would be a lot of NFT projects, Web3 businesses are looking for ways to do give back incentives within their own projects and so forth. And so they're on the lookout, they're on the hunt for nonprofits specifically to be able to give back to. But it's been interesting. There was one project that I was working with. They had a hard time finding nonprofits they could give money to because they needed to give it through crypto, and those nonprofits didn't have a wallet set up. Right. And so if you think about, we need to be able to take money in any form. I know it sounds super simple, but a lot of people don't have those business wallets set up. So I think that's a really easy thing that you can do now.
And it's bi-directional exchange. I mean, it is, you know, buying and selling, you know, or it's correct, monetary exchange through that. So, and then it's new fiat, but it is such a fascinating, you know, I guess area. So I can see your eyes light up when you talk about it, but I do want to transition a little bit. This is a really interesting part of our podcast. And you're going to think, why in the world are we asking these crazy, disparate questions here? But there is a method. Once again, there's a method behind the madness. And I just want to ask you some kind of our rapid fire questions. And I'm really interested to hear your responses to these questions. So, did you get along with your parents growing up?
Oh, where's this going to be put at? Yes, that's the answer that I'm sure all your guests needs to say.
Of course I did. Mom's listening.
You know how it is. Like when you get older, you start to understand things a little bit more. Yep. And so I was super unforgiving as a young person. And now that I'm a little bit older, I understand, you know, kind of the context in which everything was delivered. My dad and I have always been, you know, closer. So that's where I'll leave it at.
You have siblings?
I do. I have, well, she's a little sister. She's in her 30s now. But she's spunky. You think I'm spunky? No, that girl's spunky.
You have a pet?
Frizzy Sam. He's fluffy and he's a cat, and he is the boss of the house.
He's the boss of the house. So kids?
Yes, I have Lucy, Hannah Parady, who's 9, and Emerson Hope Parady, who's 5. They're amazing.
And what time do you go to bed?
When I'm doing right, I'm in bed by 9:30 Eastern Standard Time. But if I'm feeling a little extra energized, I'm staying up till about 10:30. And you know it's a party night when I'm up at 10:30.
What time do you get up in the morning?
Usually between 5 and 6.
And first thing, coffee?
100%. I'm working on drinking a cup of water before then, but that's torturous because I just want the coffee.
Ideal vacation spot anywhere in the world. Money is not an object.
One with internet service because I love what I would do. Australia.
This is the second time this week that somebody has said Australia. What is the draw? I mean, of course, I understand the kind of the.
Do you know who the
surface
Newsboys
draw,
are?
Yeah.
When I was growing up, there was this Christian band called the Newsboys, and I loved them, and I loved their accents, and I don't know why, but I know some of them were from New Zealand, some from Australia, but I think they just made me think that was just a really cool place. And I thought they were cute. So Australia.
I want to go there and meet the Newsboys.
Well, not now. I'm married, so maybe see them in passing.
Yeah, it's platonically. I have a theory that Americans and Aussies have a lot in common.
Really?
The way
How
that
come?
because we both left the UK under various circumstances, but there's Puritans and there's separatists. The Puritans want to stay and kind of fix the system. The separatists say we can't fix the system, so we've got to leave. And so I think that, I've interviewed a lot of Aussies, over the years, and it's interesting. Their mindset is so unique, and it's so we have a lot of overlap, and we think a lot in the same ways, especially in the entrepreneurial space. So it is really interesting that there's always this kind of natural bond, between Americans and Aussies when it's related to business. And we like I said, we think about things very, very similarly. But
what do you think we could learn from them?
How to work better globally. They do it just inherently. We don't have to, because we have 320 million people and we have 48 states. And the old joke says, what do you call somebody who's trilingual? That speaks 3 languages? Trilingual. What do you call somebody who speaks 2 languages? Bilingual. What do you call somebody who speaks 1 language? American. That's right.
This is so true.
There is, we need passports and we need to travel, so our worldview is broadened. But
I completely agree.
How does, are you a person of faith?
Yes.
How does that affect how you do business?
Used to, because I've gone through I hate to say the word deconstruction because I've quickly reconstructed. It hasn't just been left in shambles where I said, F the system, I don't believe in God anymore. It's been more like, oh, wow, everything that I thought that I was so true was handed to me, and I was spoon fed, and I haven't really fought for my own faith. So prior, I would say I was very more judgmental of methods and techniques and very fear-based in a lot of things because I was very, 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 very religious. And I would say as of late, when you say a person of faith, I'm really defensive over people. I feel like I've missed the whole part of Jesus being really about humans and about the person who was hurting, and not so much. I don't say he's not for the person who's kicking it and balling and have everything going for him, but his attention was always turned towards the one who needed the extra help. And so I think the way that my business, I've gotten a lot more, not to get too political, but just defensive over people and people groups who are ignored and not represented. I've noticed there's a lot of white men who are represented in places, and we need to show Black women and other religions and people who are in wheelchairs and people who have different thoughts and stuff, and not saying that everybody should believe the same way or anything like that, but also to fighting for representation. I think is super important and something that I ignored when I was in the whole religious mindset.
And I think that just as a follow-on to that, what's one thing that you would change in the business world? Maybe you already touched on that.
Representation. I think, I was on Instagram the other day, and it was like this branded business conference, and there was one color and one gender represented there. And, again, there's like these token, I've had people reach out to me and be like, oh, we need more women on this, so will you come along? And I'm like, thanks. It means a lot to me. I don't want to just participate in something because I'm a woman. However, I think, we're robbing ourselves when we don't infuse other experiences into our businesses, other perspectives. And it's not about having a token that, hey, look, we invited the Black guy or the Muslim woman or whatever like that. It's more of, wow, we're really limiting ourselves by only having one worldview here. And we would really enrich our efforts if we shut our mouths for a little bit and listen to other people.
I love the way that you kind of wrap that up, because I really believe that that it is not about that, let's kind of like seed this differently. How do we enrich the experience, that as you kind of talked about that. So it is it's been such great opportunity to just catch up with you again and just really hear, kind of your journey and to really learn about the NFT space and learn about, Web 3.0 and how that kind of intersects with the whole marketing space. And is there anything that we haven't touched on? You just want to wrap us up with today, and then maybe just tell people where's a good place to find you online and connect with you?
Sure. Well, first of all, I just thank you. This was so nice of you to have me back, and you're so great at what you do. I would say as far as connecting with me, don't worry about that. I want you to leave Kevin here a 5-star review on the podcast. That's my ask for this show, really, because putting out content is a lot of work, and it's a gift. And that's what I want to leave everybody with is a return back to education and leaving no newbie behind. And whether it's a Web3 conversation or some advanced digital conversation in your marketing or whatever, really returning back to your onboarding and how you're reaching people who have no clue what you're talking about. There's such power in that. And being proactive in your education is such a gift, because you're adding to the space. And when you can add to the space, I think community naturally gathers around that, and God, universe, whoever you believe in, rewards those because you're in an act of service. Right. So return back to education however you can.
And the best place to catch you?
Oh, Heather Parady everywhere.
Heather Parady.
Heather Parady everywhere. Yep.
All right. I will make sure those are linked in. And once again, this has been the Marketing Umbrella Podcast, where we chat with marketing experts providing insights that agency owners can use to grow and scale their businesses. Would love for you to connect with our founder of Umbrella, Itamar Shafir, at umbrellaus.com. Heather, thank you again. Have a great weekend.
You too.
Thank you for tuning in to another great episode of the Marketing Umbrella Podcast, where we provide the information you need from successful leading marketers to build and grow your digital marketing agency. To learn more, go to umbrellaus.com.